identification was, what would it take to create a food system based on nature? Throughout the year, we investigate various systems of food production and the cultural requirements of each system. Before that, I learned about healthy food, and I knew about the environmental consequences of unsustainable farming, but I had never thought about how culture affects the food industry and how the food industry affects culture. The industrial food system is where food is grown using monocropping and shipped around the world. Our personal food choices can either support or challenge this system. The system requires people to be consumers. So what would happen if we shifted to eating mainly food from local farms and from our own gardens? Well, according to Michael Brownlee, one of the founders of the local food shift and an expert on the topic, if everyone was to pay just 10% of the food they eat from local sources, the global food industry would collapse. But wouldn't that mean that people all over the world would go hungry? Well, in fact, the global food system is currently making people all over the world go hungry. In places where there used to be sustainable food systems with lots of farmers with small farms, industrial farms have taken over, using GMO seeds and lots of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. The food from the industrial farms is cheaper, and small farmers lose all of their customers and are forced to sell their farms to the industry. They have no work and no food sources. We then look at how nature feeds itself. An important part of natural ecosystems is nutrient cycling. All life needs nitrogen to build proteins and cell membranes. Nitrogen is the most common element in the atmosphere, but in its gas form, N2, is inert and reactive. It cannot be used by plants. Some bacteria can fix nitrogen in the air into ammonia and ammonium. These compounds can be used by plants, but nitrification, also done by bacteria, can change the ammonia and ammonium into nitrites and nitrates, which are the best for plants. Denitrification is done by bacteria to convert the nitrites and nitrates back into N2. After the plants use the nitrogen, animals eat the plants. Ammonification is the process of organic matter, plants, and animals, and animal waste, releasing ammonia and ammonium as they decompose. All life also needs phosphorus because it's the backbone of DNA, as well as a critical part of photosynthesis. In nature, phosphorus has a simple cycle. It is found in rocks and pulled up by plant roots. The plants are then eaten by animals, which use the phosphorus and excrete it back into the soil where it can be reused by the plants. In this system, very little phosphorus is lost. In our current agricultural system, plants are not able to naturally get enough phosphorus. One reason for this is that the high-yielding crops that have been the majority of our diet since the Green Revolution have very high phosphorus needs. Another reason is that in monocropping, there are no plants that are specifically adapted to extract minerals from the soil. After we eat the crops, we send our waste into the sewer system and eventually into lakes and oceans, where the phosphorus feeds toxic cyanobacteria and consumes oxygen. Because the soil is depleted, phosphorus fertilizer is applied every season. This phosphorus is mined from deposits of phosphate rock and shipped across the world. Through erosion or human consumption, the phosphorus ends up in oceans and lakes where new fertilizers are applied. Similar to phosphorus, potassium also has a simple cycle, from soil to plants to animals and back to soil. With industrial farming techniques, potassium is mined, refined, and used as fertilizer. Some of the potassium is consumed by humans, and the rest is lost in erosion and runoff. When potassium reaches rivers, lakes, and oceans, it changes the compositions of the salts found in the water, which can affect aquatic life. Another important part of ecosystems is soil health. Healthy soil is full of fungus, bacteria, and insects. These organisms, called soil decomposers, break down organic matter, which makes the nutrients available to plants. Organic matter is a perfect food source for decomposers, consuming about 20 to 30 parts carbon for every part nitrogen. Some of these bacteria secrete gums, wax, and gel to hold the particles of earth together, creating tilth, which makes the soil hold much more water. In conventional farming, organic matter is not allowed to decompose. To try to mimic this complicated system, fertilizers are added in excessive quantities. This causes the soil organisms to go into a feeding frenzy, but because their carbon needs are not being met, the organisms eat all of the carbon which is found in the organic matter in the soil and humus. This causes the soil organisms, many of which have important roles in the ecosystem, to run out of food and die. The organisms that survive are the ones that have learned to eat the plants, showing an example of adaptations. Adaptation is caused by genetic mutations and natural selection. Genetic Mutations are alterations to genes that can have negative effects or be beneficial. If the individual carrying the mutation to the gene survives long enough to reproduce, variation in the gene will be passed on to the next generation. This process is called natural selection and results in a species in a particular area that can be better suited to that area over time. In the example of soil organisms, the different species would have had many different food sources. When all of these plants were eliminated, these organisms that consumed the plants would be the most successful and have the most offspring. This results in organisms that cause diseases being selected, and the farmer is forced to use more pesticides. Without naturally airy soil structure, which is supported by soil organisms, the farmer is forced to mechanically loosen the soil by tilling. Tilling adds oxygen to the soil, increases the surface area, so it initially causes a boom in soil nutrients. However, this causes organic matter to be used up, and the unused minerals are washed away, so the soil is soon depleted. Now the farmer will use even more fertilizers. The fertilizers and pesticides used on conventional farms are all made from oil. After the crops are grown, they are shipped around the world using even more oil. This shipping is necessary for us to be able to sustain our food habits. We live in a place with cold winters, we expect exotics like bananas to be available all the time. In her book, Animal Vegetable Miracle, Barbara Kingsolver tells about how her family ate only local food for 1 year and how they had to change their diets. One particular challenge was when she had a large party in May and had to plan how to cater using only local food. She learned that the usual technique for catering was to have the client choose a food theme from another country. Instead, she planned her meal based on ingredients available at the time. Organisms are divided into two categories based on how they get their energy. Autotrophic organisms can produce their own food from raw materials or from photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process where plants use energy from sunlight to convert water and carbon dioxide into oxygen and glucose. Heterotrophic organisms get their energy by eating autotrophic organisms, where heterotrophic organisms are lower on the food chain. Because humans are heterotrophic, we are always dependent on a food system. We can choose what kind of food system we are dependent upon. Along with eating from local sources, we can increase our sustainability by using permaculture. Permaculture is a set of design principles that focus on mimicking nature and creating controlled ecosystems that include humans. One of the most important themes in permaculture is to close loops. This means that the inputs and outputs of each component are connected for mutual benefit. These inputs and outputs can be things such as water, nutrients, shade, food, and many others. We visited Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute, called CRIMPY for short, to see the permaculture techniques that are used there. They stress the importance of everything having several purposes. For example, a permanent greenhouse is attached to the house so that solar energy can warm both structures. The beautiful stonework in the house is critical thermal mass that stores heat. The placement of the greenhouse means that it's very convenient for harvesting food for daily cooking. They have a pond which also has many uses. It is filled with rainwater, which is water from showers, washing hands, washing dishes, and washing clothes. Rainwater is usually combined with black water, which is toilet water, and treated with harsh chemicals. In rainwater systems, only biodegradable soaps and detergents are used, and the rainwater is separated from black water and filtered using mulches and water lids. Another use of the pond is to provide habitat for wild and domestic animals. The pond also creates microclimates for the fields around it. Microclimates are areas where the climate differs from the general climate because of things such as slopes, soils, water bodies, artificial structures, and vegetation. The pond will heat and reflect sunlight onto the gills. This can extend to growing things like the plants and trees. The pond also affects the microclimate because of the humidity it creates. Another thing we saw at CRIMPY was gills. They had turned steep slopes into terraced gills around apple, peach, and Douglas fir trees. Gills are communities of plants, animals, and fungi that form an interwoven relationship where the elements of the design work together to support all of the members. Gills for fruit trees will usually include nitrogen fixers and plants that attract beneficial insects. Gills differ greatly from the typical arrangement of grass under fruit trees. Grass, along with competing for the same resources as fruit trees, is an example of an immature ecosystem. After an ecosystem is disturbed or destroyed, succession will take place. Succession is a series of more or less predictable changes that occur in the community over time. The first species to colonize a barren area are called pioneer species. The climax community occurs when the community is at its most complex. Grasses are part of the early stages succession. Lawns always are weak because they're the next step in succession. If undisturbed, lawns would alternate forests if they receive enough water. Gills recognize succession are plants that transition from producing mainly annuals to producing mainly perennials. My design is limited because we have a very small property, less than 3,000 square feet, most of which is covered by our house. I focused on possible connections by creating chicken charts. Chicken charts show the inputs and outputs of different elements so that you can connect them in the most logical way. Most of my yard is covered by the canopy of a cottonwood tree. Some of the outputs of the tree are leaves, branches, and shade. The shade currently makes it difficult for anything to grow. I decided to add oyster mushrooms to my design because they grow best in cool, dark environments and do well in cottonwood logs. In the areas on the south side of the property that do get some sun, I designed a vegetable polyculture bed and planted companion plants for the existing strawberry bed. Because permaculture is about solution-driven designs, I looked at issues with the property. One thing that struck me was how hot the house gets in the summer. To help this problem, my design includes grapes climbing to the south face of our house. The grapes should also be a food source. The food from this design would supplement our diet with fresh fruits and vegetables in the summer and fall, but it could not provide all of the calories my family of 5 needs all year round. The design potential is related to carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that an area's resources can sustain for an indefinite amount of time. Different variables can influence the area's carrying capacity. A monocrop cornfield has a much lower carrying capacity than a lush food forest. A food system based on nature's design would need to be made of many small-scale farms and gardens. To eliminate the chemical fertilizer inputs, all waste would have to be composted back into the soil, where the nutrients could be reused by the plants. A great diversity of companion plants would be necessary to ensure that the plants would not deplete the soil to protect them against pests. The system would be based mainly on perennials. No one would have to grow all the food for themselves, but every member of the community would need to contribute in some way. For this system to truly function, we would need to change our whole food culture so it's based on foods that thrive in our environment or can be produced in greenhouses. Thanks for watching my presentation. Do you have any questions?
Questions for Lotus? I have a question. We have this assumption that natural systems are perfect, or at least nature knows best in some way. And what evidence do we have to support or kind of refute this? And does permaculture truly meet those needs?
Well, nature is very sustainable, and it doesn't have any of the necessary outputs or inputs that we have in our systems, but it's not meant for food production, so we couldn't necessarily live off just a natural system. The idea of permaculture is to improve on it and mimic it, but by creating food production. And permaculture is designing, and nature doesn't really design. It's just whatever works best, so we can speed up the process of succession, and this is everything to be more to our benefit than it would be without intervention.
Other questions for Lotus? What's your favorite part about your design?
I thought the mushrooms were a really cool connection, but I really like fruit, so I like how we have raspberries and strawberries and blackberries.
All right. Any last questions? Great. Thanks, Lotus.